slavery died. Elephants in rooms. Ken LaCorte. Alright, man, so let's get into this thing today. So it's a big narrative going around the world that slavery was solely ended because it was the nice thing to do. It was the humane thing to do. And to be totally honest, that isn't the truth. Completely, for the most part, it's not the truth. And another thing I want to talk about slavery, before we do get into this video, I want to show something in correlation with races and slavery. Alright. Now, when you look at this list, all these groups of people at one time or another in this world were slaves. Alright. So you see Africans, African Americans, indigenous people of Americas, indigenous Australians, Pacific Islanders, including Hawaiians and Polynesian groups, the Europeans, Slavs, Greeks, Romans, Celts, Vikings, all Europeans. Well, a lot of Europeans, I should say. And the word Slavs, that's where the word slave come from. Alright, so they do like to correlate slave with darker pigmented people when that's not the case. Alright, the word slave comes from European Slavs. Alright, then you got the Middle Eastern people, you got the South Asian people, you got the South Asian people, you got the East Asian people, Asian, the Central and South Americas, the Mediterranean. So basically you get my point, right? You get the point that slavery isn't a black thing. It isn't a melanated thing. It's a worldwide thing. Alright? And whoever has the power of the narrative and media at that point is going to paint those people in a horrible way. Alright? And correlate destructive, horrible things to them. Alright? Now that we got that out the way, let's get into this thing.
This could probably go without saying, but being a slave would have been a really, really bad way to spend your life. But being a slave owner? Well, that doesn't seem like the worst gig in the world. And on a broader level, countries built their economies on slavery. So why did they give it up? I mean, it sounds like it should have been an obvious answer, because it was evil, or because people got nicer. But those simple answers don't hold up. Slavery was part of humanity for at least 10,000 years, probably more, and in virtually every part of the world. The Greeks did it. The Romans did it. The Chinese, the Arabs, the Africans, even Catholic popes had slaves. And at least one had actually been a slave. Virtually every society on Earth had some form of slavery, and nobody seemed to think twice about it until suddenly they did. And then, in about 150 years, it all collapsed. I'm Ken LaCorte, and I try to answer questions that make some people squirm. And today's elephant in the room: why did humanity abolish slavery? It didn't.
And that's a good point that he brought up. He said only 150 years ago. So not being slaves or not having slaves in mass across the world is a very new thing. But let me say this too. In certain ways or forms, it's more slavery now today than ever. All right. And it's not just the cotton fields and things like that. It's sex work, human trafficking, true slavery, and other forms that are going around the world at this moment. But the painting that is totally gone has only been 150 years.
Magically become unprofitable. Slaves didn't all escape, and the moral arguments had existed for centuries without much effect. And there wasn't one hero who convinced everyone of its evil, although no human being on Earth did more to abolish slavery than this guy. And virtually no one knows his name. So we'll first look at religion and morality, because after thousands of years, they did play a role. And then we'll look at how modern slave rebellions changed the cost-benefit analysis, and how all of it changed the economics of slavery. And finally, we'll take a look at one country's crusade that brought slavery to a much quicker end, and how that country was influenced by a single viral image. Okay, so for most of history, religion and morality were used to justify slavery, not challenge it. And why not? The Old Testament includes rules for how to treat slaves. Jesus never condemned it. Paul told slaves to obey their masters. The Quran regulates ownership and doesn't ban it either. In the ancient world, faith and slavery went hand in hand. It was simply accepted, part of the natural order woven into both scripture and society. The earliest moral and legal codes often priced people by rank. Accidentally kill a noble, pay gold. Kill a slave, pay a whole lot less. Worth.
And before he continues, when we get back to religion, there's this thing in the Holy Bible, King James Version, that says the curse of Ham. And in the curse of Ham, the European preachers and establishment, religious establishment, the Christian religious establishment used that to demonize the darker pigmented man into slavery. All right, they used that verse to say it was okay to demonize black people and put them in slavery because of the curse of Ham. And if you ever look at that verse or that curse of Ham, they never said anything about color. All right, they twisted things up in a way so you could be a slave. All right.
Was pegged to a class or a clan. But things started to change in the Enlightenment age. In the late 1600s, intellectuals like John Locke and Voltaire, they laid the groundwork for ideas of liberty, natural rights, and universal reason. Now, these concepts challenged established hierarchies, but even still, most of these early figures, they still either completely ignored slavery or they made exceptions for it. Heck, Locke even invested in slave trading companies while writing about freedom. But Enlightenment reshaped how religion was understood and practiced. It gave rise to a more personal, conscience-driven morality. And importantly, it reinforced the idea that political institutions should align with moral law. Around the same time, long before slavery became national debates, Quakers were already breaking ranks. They banned owning slaves within their communities. They published tracts and letters condemning it, and they made it theological, not just economic or political. Still, for a long time, they were the religious exception. Even in the United States, where many churches condemned cruelty, few challenged the institution itself. Again, the Bible had passages that could be viewed either way, so slaveholders used them to defend the status quo. But then came evangelical revival. The 1700s saw a surge of emotional, populist Christianity, what historians call the Great Awakening. It didn't just change how people worshiped, it changed what they believed they were supposed to do. Suddenly, personal salvation came with a sense of duty. If your soul had been awakened by God, you couldn't just sit still, you had to act. In America, many northern abolitionists were products of that movement, and they took it as their duty to fight. That theological divide split national churches down the middle. Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, they all fractured into northern and southern denominations, often over slavery alone. What's striking is that this moral turnaround happened quickly in historical terms. Just a few decades earlier, most churches were either silent on slavery or totally complicit. Now they were sending missionaries to preach against it, organizing boycotts and circulating petitions with tens of thousands of signatures. Western Christian nations really led the way on this, but they don't necessarily get a great big gold star. These were the same societies that had trafficked millions of people for centuries. But Western Christianity was the first religion to mobilize a sustained activism that eventually forced other societies around the world to follow suit. But slaves played a role in their freedom as well. Rebellions.
Yeah, Western Christianity did, but as he'll get to, you'll see why they did it. Okay? They're very good at painting certain things in a certain way to make it seem like they're doing something out the goodness of their heart. All right? So never get fooled by it. Are there some people that truly did want it to be done? Yes, but that's not the most or the that's the more of, not the lesser than. All right, so let's understand that. And another thing I always notice with these religions, right? They're always breaking down into denominations, right? They sound just like Crips and Bloods, right? At first it was just Crips, right? And then now you got rolling 60s and 40s and Vernon and Raymond and all that. Now you got 1,000 Crip sets, right? Same thing with Christianity. Ain't nothing different. They broke down into denominations and they believe what they believe now, but they still carry the Christian name. Just like any Crip set or Blood set that was claiming Crip or are claiming Crip, but now they live by that rule, the rolling 20s, the rolling 60s rules. Like, you're not even a Christian no more. You're not even a Crip no more.
Were large and small, and slaves fought back constantly. And that resistance chipped away at the institution from the inside. Some of it was dramatic and violent. Some of it was quieter. But it all had a cost, And over time, that cost helped make slavery harder to defend, harder to enforce, and harder to afford. Let's start with the big one, the Haitian Revolution. In 1791, nearly 500,000 slaves rose up against French rule. It quickly became war, a brutal 13-year fight that destroyed plantations, decimated French forces, and ended with the creation of Haiti, the first black republic in the Western Hemisphere. Now, Haiti wasn't just a colony, it was the colony, the richest sugar-producing territory on Earth. And to put it in perspective, at its peak, it generated more revenue than all 13 American colonies combined. And then it was gone. And that sent shockwaves through the whole slave-owning world. And Haiti wasn't an isolated case. 40 years later, in Jamaica,
Shout out to Haiti and shout out to Jamaica for what they did.
60,000 slaves sparked an uprising known as the Baptist War. It only lasted 10 days before British troops crushed it, but that rattled Parliament. And just a year later, Britain passed the Slavery Abolition Act, freeing nearly 1 million slaves across the empire. Mass revolts like this weren't common, but when they happened, they hit hard. They shattered the myth that slavery was stable. They scared investors, and they forced political hands. But slave revolts are as old as slavery itself. The Spartacus Rebellion in 73 BC terrified Rome. So slaves have always resisted. Why did it now seem to matter in the 18th and 19th centuries? The biggest difference? Scale. The Europeans had taken slavery and they really industrialized it. By the 1700s, it had moved from household or urban labor to mass-scale plantations, especially in the Caribbean and the American South. That created dense, majority slave population areas, and they were harder to control. And the stakes were higher as well. Cotton, sugar, tobacco exports. These were huge parts of nations' GDPs. A successful revolt didn't just burn a few crops, it could affect a country's entire economy. After the Haitian Revolution, French investors had lost millions, and people noticed. Importantly, these were also happening at the same time that new morality was taking hold, and a single rebellion could help shift public opinion and government action. But full-scale revolts weren't the only threat. Every day across the American South and beyond, slaves resisted in quieter, harder to track ways. They worked slower, broke tools, faked illness, and thousands escaped entirely. When they did, they didn't just disappear, they became part of a network, the Underground Railroad. That was an informal system of routes and safe houses and secret supporters stretching from the south to the north, sometimes into Canada. It helped thousands of people reach freedom, and it made slave owners paranoid. Because every escape came with a cost. Lost labor, lost capital. It forced owners to invest in tracking them down with rewards and bounty hunters. All of it added up, and the broader security cost was even worse. Southern states poured money into slave patrols, militias, and night riders, charging them with stopping runaways and putting down rebellions before they started. In some places, every adult white male was legally required to serve in a patrol, and large budgets were devoted to it. And the more...
So you can see how the racism thing just bleeds over everywhere. Every white male had duty to capture a black person, bro. So don't think that shit just goes away in 50 years, 100 years, or whatever, man. Are they like that all the way now? It doesn't seem like that, but don't think that shit ain't in them. It was put in them. Like, heavily put in them. So when you see them out here and they feel like they got the authority to do something or check something, bro, that's inbred in them.
Violent the enforcement became, the more resistance it sparked in return. It all gradually shifted the equation. What had once been an efficient labor system became a security headache. Now, look, resistance alone didn't bring down slavery, but it made it less sustainable and less stable and less profitable. The truth is, pretty much no economic model, no matter how profitable it is, can survive when it needs to be defended at gunpoint 24/7. And in the end, the system really collapsed when it stopped making financial sense. For centuries, slave labor was the...
And there we are. There we have it. There goes the answer. All right? Now, you do have these few people that say, hey, man, that's not right. But when the money gets involved, it might not be right. But it's still going to go on if the money's still there. Now, these rebellions and having to do all this other stuff and extra stuff and do all this, it started not to make economic sense like it once did. That's the reason for slavery ending. But I'll allow him to finish.
Backbone of global wealth. Ancient Rome ran on it, and China and the Arab caliphates and the Ottoman Empire and nearly every colonial power. America's cotton and sugar empires were just the modern face of something that existed pretty much forever. Slaves didn't need wages, and they couldn't walk off the job. The model was horrifying, but it was efficient. And as long as the economics work, nobody at the top has much incentive to change it. But eventually, that math stopped working. In 1776, the same year the American colonies declared independence, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, a groundbreaking understanding of national economics. In that book, Smith wrote, "The work done by free men comes cheaper in the end than that performed by slaves." That wasn't a moral claim, but a cost analysis. Smith argued that slave labor seems cheap up front, but it's inefficient, inflexible, and expensive to maintain. You had to first buy a person, then house them, clothe them, feed them, and guard them. And slave labor was fixed. You owned a person whether or not they were productive, or if cotton prices dropped, or if the overall marketplace changed somehow. On the other hand, hired labor is plug and play. Workers move to where jobs are. They can learn new skills more easily. They can be hired and fired on demand. This was especially true as the Industrial Revolution changed how people worked. Paid labor became cheaper. And we saw this on a macro scale as well. When Britain abolished slavery, that didn't trigger some economic meltdown. The British government paid former slave owners millions in compensation, equal to about 40% of the national budget. It was one of the largest wealth transfers in British history. But despite the payout, and despite losing access to free labor across the empire, Britain's GDP surged. So did exports, investment, and industrial output. The Americans...
So just know, melanated man, they still want you as slaves. It's just not economically efficient. And it's crazy that the slave owners got rich when slavery ended.
The South fought to keep slavery, but the North had already moved far past them, building factories, canals, and a growing urban workforce. The Northern economy didn't need to own people. It just needed to rent their time. And that made it faster, leaner, and more adaptive than the plantation system. In the years after the U.S. Civil War, the national economy surged, and the country entered one of the biggest growth periods in its history. And the South still lags behind. Look at Brazil, which was the last major country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery. When it did, it was already falling behind and it never had fully industrialized during the 1800s. Its economy stayed tied to agriculture. It preserved slavery at the cost of modernization, and it paid the price. Eventually, even slave owners saw the writing on the wall. Slavery wasn't just morally indefensible, but it was becoming morally obsolete. But we have to be careful in thinking of the economics of slavery as a standalone factor. It's where the rubber meets the road, but it's
the biggest. Don't be letting people fool you. All right. If it was still very profitable, it would still be happening. I know it was some people that think it's bad and wrong, but you were thinking it was bad and wrong while it was happening. All right. You didn't make the decisions. All right. Or you weren't in position to make that happen. So even the people that were in position to make it happen, they knew it was wrong, but it was still making money. All right. So let's not do that, bro.
also intertwined with everything else. It's like asking why a restaurant failed and being told that it ran out of money. I mean, yes, but you can't separate that from the food being bad or a location being a problem. Still, there's a bit of an uncomfortable truth that the system didn't die just because we became better people. It officially died because it lost a competition. Paid labor beat slave labor. And once the numbers changed, the moral argument started winning. In the same vein, we can't minimize the moral stances. Look at the United States. No other country ended slavery the way America did, by killing each other by the thousands. About 600,000 people died in the Civil War. That's roughly equal to every other American war in history.
And if people don't really know what happened with the Civil War, what basically happened was this. The South was trying to do their own thing and become their own country and stuff and keep slavery. And the North was like, no, we're doing this and we don't want y'all to leave. You can't leave. And so basically the Civil War was about slavery. Long story short.
Combined. Entire cities were leveled. And underneath it all was a fight over slavery. Now, I know that there are some who say that the war was fought over economics or other reasons, but it's just historically wrong. The South fought to preserve slavery, and the North fought to keep the country together without it. Every other rationale was downstream of that reality. And in America,
All right, I think we get the point there. There was a guy that I wanted to show you in here, but you can go watch his video. I had the link in the description. I think we got what we need here, but there is a very important person that you should look up as well. But shout out to the YMs and shout out to everybody. Shout out to Haiti. Shout out to Jamaica. You know what I mean? Because even though it didn't, y'all made it economically inefficient to keep doing this. All right. So shout out to Jamaica. Shout out to Haiti. All right. And shout out to the Underground Railroad. Shout out Harriet Tubman too. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to all my melanated people. All right. Shout out to my YM the most though. We out.